understanding, my knowledge. You see, the whole thing organically related in that sense. Me. Now, that is the being, you see, that is creating its own meaning. My being. The for me. What then is the other, the in itself? Well, it's nothing but what it is for me. I don't know anything else about it but its for me-ness. I only know it as a phenomenal object. You see? So from the standpoint of intentional consciousness, the in itself is nothing. So the whole of being and nothingness is a tale of being and nothingness. Get it? Carl?
So he's not, you can't draw a line between the master servant and the for itself and the in itself, because both master and servant are for themselves.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing, because in Hegel you get the sense that the master-servant relationship is potentially an I-thou relationship, in which the I is a for me, and the thou is another for me. Okay? And the way Hegel plays it out in that selection you read, each of these is seeing the other as he is for me, right? Now the thing is about Satre is that it's more a one-sided relationship. It's not an I-thou, but an I-it. That's Martin Buber's language. It's not an I-thou, it's an I-it. You see? So that the other person is, we tend to say, dehumanized. You see? If the in itself is indeed a human being with a consciousness, I don't know the other person's consciousness. I only know what he is for me. I don't know what he is for himself. And so in that sense, you never get inside the other self. And all you have is an I-it. In that sense, a one-way street. Now, he does point up that sometimes the I-it, no, not the I-it, sometimes the in itself sort of rises up against you. And that's what happens with the flies. They rise up against Orestes. But sometimes the I-it that rises up against you may be another person who does it out of the for me-ness of his intentionality. But it's always antithesis, 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 the clash of opposites, dialectic struggle. So, in effect, you see, Sartre has a dialectical antithesis, thesis and antithesis with no synthesis. Because there's no universals. No synthesis.
So you have, depending on what affects the one person would see as I, it, and as the other person would, it's the same relationship?
Yeah, I suppose if you're talking of a father-child relationship, okay, the tendency of the child is to see the father as an it, especially in early adolescence growing up. Yes, and the, shall I say, the unsympathetic father is apt to see a child as just another it to be provided for, you'll see, as a for me in some other way. but my kids. You see. You get it between students in administration, or faculty in administration, where it's a we, them. You know, and I use the accusative case to get the dehumanization into it. Yeah. Labor management. Well, it's no wonder that Sartre, one phase in his life, sort of allied himself with French Marxism. You see, because the theme of alienation runs through both. The dialectic with its alienation runs through both. You see.
Wouldn't the in itself side of the dialectic almost dissolve itself? Because
Now, say that again, I missed it.
wouldn't the in itself side of the dialectic almost be dissolved? It's not anything until
Yeah. Wouldn't the in itself, you say inside of the dialectic?
Well, I said the part of the dialectic without the end.
Oh. Yeah, you see, the in itself, insofar as it's made for me, I make it for me, the in itself is nothing left but what it is for me, as far as I'm concerned. That's why it's nothing. You say dissolved. He would say negated. Same thing.
Where's the clash?
Well, the clash comes in as much as the in itself is resistant. In as much as there is some a boomerang effect. Yes, sir. Or in those three people in that room, no exit. When the third person intrudes into the budding relationship. And by intruding and making up to the one who's becoming for me, makes that one into a for me for herself. So that what was someone for me becomes just an in itself, dissolving the for me-ness. I can't reach her anymore. You see? Or it could just be that the other person doesn't like me and slaps my face. You see? So, you know, just reflect for a moment on interpersonal relationships, and you see how realistic the description sounds. Which is why it makes such gripping and sickening plays and novels. All right, now, against that background, the transcendence of the ego. Okay? The transcendence of the ego. And the introduction by the editor, you'll find helpful in setting the context in relationship to Husserl. Now, I've already tried to do that, okay? But you'll find it helpful in that. The text itself begins on page 31, and the opening lines will, I think, begin to make some sense. For most philosophers, the ego is an inhabitant of consciousness. Hey, that sounds like Descartes, doesn't it? Inhabiting my consciousness is this self that has the consciousness. Some affirm its formal presence at the heart of Erlebnis. Erlebnis is literally lived throughness. Erlebnis, livedness, it's the German equivalent of concrete experience. the notion we found in both Whitehead and Dewey. Concrete experience is here, if you pardon the new verb, existentialized. Okay? Lived experience, concrete experience in existential terms, erlebnis. Some affirm its formal presence as an empty principle of unification, unifying the self like a transcendental ego. Others, psychologists for the most part, claim to discover its material presence as the center of desires and acts in each moment of the psychic life. That sounds like the behaviorist. We'd like to show here that the ego is neither formally as transcendental structure, nor materially in consciousness. It's outside, in the world. It's a being of the world, like the ego of another. Yeah, there's no hidden soul tucked away within. All that self refers to is in the world. Being in the world. Design. On page, he refers to Kant and builds up the historical story that you're familiar with. Then on page 34, at the bottom of the page, he formulates the question arising from Descartes' cogito. Bottom of 34, is the I that we encounter in our consciousness made possible by the synthetic unity of our representations? Now, whose position was that? Kant. The I made possible by the synthetic unity of our representations. Or is it the I which in fact unites the representations to each other? Now, if we reject all the more or less forced interpretations of I think that are offered by post-Kantians, wish to solve the problem of the existence in fact of the I, we meet in our path the phenomenology of Husserl. So to Husserl he turns, and Husserl's attempt at a scientific kind of phenomenology. On page 37, he says towards the top, Husserl gives his reply, having determined in his logical investigations that the me is a synthetic and transcendent production of consciousness, yes, intentionality. He reverted in ideas towards a new phenomenology and phenomenological philosophy to the classic position of the transcendental I. This I, so to speak, behind each consciousness would light up each phenomenon presented in the field of attention. This transcendental consciousness becomes thoroughly personal, so forth. And what Sartre goes on to do is simply to repudiate that at the top of page 38. It's certain that phenomenology doesn't need any appeal to any such unifying and individualizing I. By intentionality, consciousness transcends itself. It unifies itself by escaping from itself. Notice how he loves paradoxical statements. You see? And I think he loves them because he's trying to capture the dialectic. Thesis, antithesis. It unifies itself by escaping from itself. Yes, in the intentionality of dealing with something new, I am transcending what I already am and becoming something different. You see?